Dearbhla Walsh, good morning from Los Angeles and thank you for joining us for today's event. My name is Orla Keane and I'm the Consul General of Ireland in LA. As many of you will know, we at the Consulate are relatively new arrivals to Los Angeles. We officially opened in September 2019. We represent Ireland in Southern California and the Pacific Southwest, and we have a particular emphasis on supporting Ireland's creative industries and promoting Irish culture in this part of the United States, working closely with our state agencies, including Screen Ireland and Enterprise Ireland. Ireland has a vibrant and growing film, television and animation industry with diverse voices, talent and opportunities. We are delighted to showcase just some of our directing talent today and are grateful to the Screen Directors Guild of Ireland for their support in organising this event. This panel discussion is also part of a series of global events hosted by Irish Embassies and Consulates around the world throughout the month of February as part of our annual Brigid's Day celebrations. Brigid is a figure of Irish legend, myth and folklore and has assumed many guises depending on the telling of the story, from Celtic goddess to patron saint. So what better opportunity to focus on the creativity of Irish women, and we're delighted to close out the programme of Brigid's Day events in the US with this event from LA this morning. We have a great lineup for you with three accomplished Irish directors, Dearbhla Walsh, Lisa Mulcahy and Neasa Hardiman, who all have a wealth of directing experience both in Ireland and internationally. We're also delighted to be joined by Howard A. Rodman, who will be our moderator. Howard is an author, screenwriter and educator whose works include The Great Eastern and Destiny Express, as well as screenplays for the movies Savage Grace, August and Joe Gould's Secret. Howard is also the past president of the Writers Guild of America West, professor of screenwriting at USC School of Cinematic Arts, and an artistic director of the Sundance Screenwriting Labs. So thank you again for joining us from Ireland, the US and even further afield. And I'll now hand over to our panel to kick off the discussions.
Hello. I'd like to thank Orla for setting this up in the first place and for those gracious introductions. I'd like to thank Connor and Barry for doing the work behind the scenes that has made this all possible. And I'd really like to thank Neasa, Dearbhla, and Lisa for being here. You're in 3 different cities with 3 different very busy schedules. So I much appreciate your taking time out of your day to do this. And I also very much want to thank the audience that is participating with us in this. I don't know if you've ever seen a webinar without an audience, but it's dismal. This is much better. So I want to thank everybody for being here today and participating. I'd like to start actually by talking about my mother. In 1960, as a single working mom, my mom decided to reinvent her life and went to NYU Film School when no women went to film school. She graduated and wanted to be a director, but nobody really even knew what that meant. Ida Lupino was kind of this sort of odd one-off in the past. Anya Sparta was working over there, but nobody quite knew about it. And so it wasn't that they told her she couldn't do it. They couldn't imagine that job being done by her. So she thought, I want to be an assistant director, and was quickly told, well, we already have one of those. There was one woman assistant director in New York, and so that slot was filled. So my mom became a script supervisor. Often the only woman in a room full of 40 or 50 guys navigating through that world day after day. You know, this guy you have to flatter if you want to get anything out of him. This guy you must never, ever flirt with. This guy you have to flirt with if you want to work with him. That was her life. And I think about all of the energy she expended being a woman in an industry completely full of men, except for maybe hair and wardrobe. And I think of the stories she had to tell that she couldn't tell because nobody could imagine her as somebody who could tell stories. And so I'd like to just breathe a great sigh of relief and offer up great hosannas of celebration that in my lived human lifetime, I've seen us go from that world to this one, where the idea of women making movies isn't some kind of unimaginable reach or some kind of freak anomaly, or even increasingly some kind of there, that's nice that you do that, but in fact at the heart of what we do in television and cinema today. So I just want to say um, thank you for all of the people whose struggles got us to where we are here. And thank you to all the people who will come after us, who will build on this and create a cinematic world where people are not voices for the voiceless, where everybody has a voice. Um, so want to go now from the sublime to the ridiculous, and ask the question that everybody hates to be asked and nobody likes talking about, but is obligatory in this kind of thing. It's what I think at the beginning of Catcher in the Rye he referred to as all that David Copperfield kind of crap. And like to just start with Lisa, if you will, and just tell us, how you got from childhood to here, when you first knew you wanted to do this, and then how you did it.
Hi. Okay, so I will tell you very briefly, but I do have a funny story to tell you apropos of what you've just talked about. And basically, when I was a child, I always wondered how people made films and how they made television programs. And I was always interested in that. And my father was encouraging me to do a bilingual secretarial course, and that was never going to happen. So I was the youngest of six. So by the time it got to me, my parents just weren't really willing to fight anymore. So I went to college, and then I got a job as an assistant film editor, and I worked in film editing for a couple of years, literally film editing. And then whereas I loved that, and it's brilliantly creative, and particularly if you want to direct, but I just didn't like being in a room on my own all the time. So I decided to change to being an assistant director, and I worked my way up through the ranks of being an assistant director. And Dearbhla will know this because I worked with Dearbhla as lot when I was an AD and she was directing. And I used to AD, when I was a first AD, I used to AD a lot of commercials. And when I was the first AD, there was no other female first ADs in Ireland. So I was the first female AD in Ireland. And so this would have been in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. So the film crews were still primarily made of men. And as anybody who's ever been on a film set will know, what a first AD does, basically you're the sergeant major of a set. It's the voice that you hear when you go on a film set. It's up to you to keep everything going, to keep everybody working, making sure everybody's doing their job and various other things, and to be the voice of the director in many ways to the various departments. And there was a grip who worked in Ireland at the time, and he obviously just could not bear that there was a female first AD relaying instructions to him. And he used to refer to me on set in front of everybody as, he would say things like, the little girl says we've got to lay this track. And so and that's the sort of thing that you had to put up with. And this is in the mid 90s, which really doesn't seem that far away. Yeah. And he would refer to me as the little girl, and I was the first AD on the set. And I know the girls would probably find that astounding because they work with first ADs all the time and they know what they do. But yes, I think when we were starting off, and I'm sure Dearbhla and Neasa would say, you really had to have true grit and a sense of humor, because anyway, so I was a first for quite a long time. And in lull periods of when it was quiet, I directed a play, and that's when I started to work with actors. And then I realized, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. And then from then on, I just did shorts, and I was never going back. I never wanted to be a first again. I just wanted to direct and work with actors and tell stories.
Cool. And is that moviola behind you a kind of totem or talisman, or do you use it?
Well, this is really weird. I'm actually in a post-production house in Dublin. And when I stopped editing, I actually bought this moviola. So about 30 years ago. and I donated it to this post-production house. I just happened to be sitting in this room.
Oh, that's
And it works. I had it at home. It works perfectly. When I worked as an assistant editor in London, we worked in Moviolas, and they're the most, it's just architecturally a most beautiful machine. And they're just so tactile, and it's a lovely way to work. But obviously it's a long time since this has been used.
Yeah, but it's lovely the way things come full circle like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, Dearbhla, it's your turn to tell us everything about your life, but briefly.
Well, my trajectory, I can say in the short version, is 3 words, and it's Maeve, Anita, and Jane. And I suppose they're the 3 women along my route who have inspired me. Maeve being my mother growing up, because I grew up in a small town, and there was a cinema in it in the early 1900s, but it closed, I think, about, I don't know, 1930. So we didn't, I wasn't brought up with cinema, but I was brought up in a home and family in town steeped in amateur drama. We had the kind of longest running amateur festival in Ireland. And my father acted in the local drama group, Charlestown, and also my grandfather lived with us growing up. My grandfather and dad used to build the sets for the plays every year. And then my mother was the kind of archetypal committee woman. So she sold raffle tickets, made cakes, was the secretary, was the PRO, was everything but the boss. But actually, like every clever boss, they put somebody very brilliant behind them. And my mother was one of those brilliant people who basically did everything, always 10 minutes or an hour after it should have been done. But and we grew up making sandwiches for the plays, showing people to their seats, and getting out of our now this sounds like very dodgy, but getting out of our beds and bedrooms to give our rooms to actors who would be visiting from Dublin or whatever, because my mother also turned our home into a business, and I grew up in a B&B. Selling Irishness for a living. So so that was my experience of, I had no idea that you could be a director. There were no directors, any theatre directors around me were male directors, and I just didn't imagine it. Now we know if you can see it, you can be it. So I really didn't know what I wanted to be. I thought I wanted to be an actress, but I absolutely freeze in front of the camera. So I thought that was the route, and I went to college, and but doing a course that that I didn't really know what it was about, communications, because I didn't want to nurse or be in the bank or all the, and I knew I didn't want to get married before I was 25 as well. But that's a whole other story. But when I was in DCU, I did my student placement in RTE, and when I was in RTE, I was a runner for a first-time director who was directing a kind of talent show, screen test it was called, and her name was Anita, and I just marveled at her. She thought she was extraordinary. I just the way I watched her, she was like a glamorous Italian version of my mother, but she didn't curse and blind like my mother did, and she always seemed to do things in time. So she just commanded authority, got people to do things when they were telling her how much it wasn't going to happen. She explained to them how it was. And we went on to become best friends, and she's passed away now, but she remains my second strong role model. And then thirdly, I realized that actually women could make movies. And I saw An Angel at My Table and The Piano and Jane Campion's movies. And I went, and there is an embarrassing clip from the Sligo Champion, which I'm sure my father still has in a dusty file at home, where I kind of very proudly and naively and arrogantly said I was going to be the next Jane Campion of Ireland. That was about 30 years ago, and here I am. So anyhow, God bless the innocence of youth. But so my trajectory is really being inspired by people and realizing it's possible, because I really didn't know what was possible. But my mother used to say, let nobody tell you what you can't do, you can do anything. And of course, I was brought up in an absolutely in a culture rich with storytelling, but we didn't call it storytelling. It was just people chatting, and you know, it was just living, and then you know, RT and public broadcasting. I have a great commitment to public broadcasting and the role of the public broadcaster, and I've been fortunate enough to. It was very hard to break out of Ireland. I think Lisa, who was the best first AD I worked with, had a huge loss to ADs and obviously a huge benefit. And Neasa, who I worked with as the graphics artist, who was a great loss there. But obviously now, you know, we all rally forth. But it was very hard to get listened to or get work in Ireland. And in a way, you had to go away to come back. And a kind of a very defining show I worked on was an Irish language series in RTE. And I didn't want to do a music show. It was a kind of a squeal and mock and bubbling kind of diddly eye. And I just really hated that version of what Irish culture, or just the cliche of that. So I set up a show called Eku Eku, which I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to try and make a show in the Irish language that you don't have to understand Irish to enjoy, because as you know, Irish people have a very love-hate relationship with the language. Personally, I love it, and that pushed me to visualize all the time, and to, you know, we did on the subjects of anorexia, kids' obsession with computer games, the power of advertising. We explored those themes, but I never allowed somebody to stand in front of the camera and do what's called a piece to camera, that we had to find ways to write comedy sketches or do dramas. So we would write something in kind of 3-4 days. And I shared a house with 4 other girls in Dublin 8, and our bathroom, their bedrooms, our kitchen, the front, like, were the constant locations to shoot these dramas. So from humble beginnings, I'm here. As for my talisman, this is a little green girl on a little kind of 1950s toy that I wrapped on a shoot yesterday, and the most beautiful, most wonderful art director gave it to me as a lucky. So that's me. That's a kind of a green girl, which I kind of think of as St. Brigid riding the hills of Hollywood, and hopefully she'll be more like E.T. than the Wicked Witch of the East and take off into the sunset. So they're my humble beginnings.
Okay, just watch it, because there's a wind advisory for today, and I would hate for you to lose.
Oh, this girl has wings, and she'll last forever. Don't you worry.
Okay. So I think we all miss the intimacy and presence of people actually being in a room, but there are also some opportunities. I mean, Lisa, you're in Dublin. Dearbhla, you're in Greater Los Angeles. Neasa, you're in London, yes? So, you know, I see, you know, the satellite sort of goes. So tell us how you got here. You know, all of that stuff that your colleagues were.
Yes, sorry, yes. The short version. You know, it's very interesting hearing Lisa and Dearbhla talk. And the thing that really comes home to me is what you were saying, Howard. You have to, and what Lisa and Dearbhla both said, you have to see it to be it. And certainly I shared that experience of having the impulse and the drive towards visual storytelling, but kind of struggling to place that actually in my earlier life. So, you know, what I did was that I've always been a big reader, I've always been a big storyteller, I've always written, I've always kind of been really interested in that, and I was really interested in visual art. And I was really interested in a whole load of things when I left school. And I thought, okay, I'm going to study visual art, because if I study visual art, I can keep myself really open and I can learn everything that I can possibly learn. And I'm really glad I did that, because it gave me a set of concrete skills, and it also did really open the world to me, because having done my primary degree, I was lucky enough to win a scholarship, and I went to Berlin and I studied what you might call a visual art film, or art film, I suppose. And I studied under 2 really brilliant artists, Rebecca Horn and Valley Export, both of whom were really considered feminists who had made a huge impact in video art and film art in the 80s, and then they were teaching in Berlin in the 90s when I was there, and that was exhilarating and transformative. And their work was, it was political and it was really visual and it was layered and nuanced. And I thought, okay, this is for me. This is where I belong in this world. But I wanted to come home to Ireland. I didn't want to be, you know, one of those people that leaves Ireland and never comes back. So I thought, okay, I have to go home if I want, you know, to have roots in Ireland. I have to go home and be there in my 20s. So I was lucky enough to win a job at RT, which is how I met Dearbhla. So I ended up working on Echo Echo, doing the design and the visual art elements of that show. And I ended up doing a lot of work with RT in that direction. I did a lot of title sequences and visual stuff, and I designed the logo and designed all the kind of corporate stuff as well as a lot of on-screen stuff. And it was luckily enough that time in the kind of mid-90s when music videos and commercials were kind of moving into the digital sphere. So I got a very early baptism into the digital sphere and into that enmeshing of digital and natural filmmaking. So that was really interesting and kind of grounded me in that world. And then a little bit like Lisa, I made documentaries with RT, and then I thought, I prefer the control of fiction. I think it's Hitchcock who said, when you make documentaries, God is the director, but when you make drama, the director is God. So which one I wanted to be. So I thought, okay, I need to learn how to work with actors. That's something I'm really confident visually. I'm really confident in terms of, you know, putting image and sound together and making meaning from all of that training. But I need to know how to work with actors. So I went away, I did some training in that. At the European Film Academy actually selected a couple of directors each year to go and train to work with actors. And I was lucky enough that they scooped me up and gave me that kind of world-class training. And they also scooped me up and gave me world-class training in screenwriting that was coming out of Denmark at the time. So I really benefited from being within that European kind of public sector system, being able to go, I'd like that training, and they just scoop you up and give it to you. Yeah. And I wrote and directed for theatre, so I could have those kind of long rehearsal periods with actors and learn the language and the nuance and the playing with meaning that actors engage in that incredibly exhilarating way. And at that point, obviously, like the other two women here, I was hooked. It was like, this is something I can do for the rest of my life and still be learning. So there was no way I was ever going to swerve off that course at that point. And like Dearbhla then, it was necessary for me to leave Ireland in order to get an opportunity. I think that's to do with two things. It's to do with the amount of filmmaking that goes on in Ireland, which is, you know, by virtue of the fact that it's a small population, quite small. But I think there was also a lot of kind of, there was patriarchy going on. And therefore it was easier to go elsewhere. So I got a lot of, I was very lucky that I got a lot of support from the BBC, and I did a lot of early work with them, and that really helped me as a director. And on the strength of that, and on the strength of winning a BAFTA, then I kind of catapulted into US drama, and that was really exciting. And suddenly you feel like, actually, this is storytelling for a global audience now. This is kind of the sky is the limit. So that, yeah, that's kind of my trajectory.
Okay, I want to ask you next, all of you, about either what projects you're working on now or are about to or really, really want to. And then I want to have a kind of slightly more abstract discussion about the extraordinary changes from the kind of primacy of the theatrical exhibition model to the weird world we find ourselves in now, not brought about by COVID, but certainly accelerated by it. But before we get to the sort of lofty part of this discussion, Lisa, what are you working on now?
So I'm currently editing a new 4-part drama for BBC and PBS Masterpiece called Ridley Road, set in 1962, about a young girl from Manchester, a young Jewish girl from Manchester who kind of leaves her very relatively comfortable, sure life to follow her true love, to find out that he's been living undercover as in a fascist organization. And when he gets injured, she goes in undercover into the organization in an attempt to bring it down. So that's basically what the series is about. It's based on the book written by Joe Bloom called of the same name, Ridley Road, and it's based loosely on true, real events. So yeah.
And you've worked in the Wilkie Collins world, and you might be working in the Sheridan Le Fanu world.
Yes,
what
that's
about
right.
those kinds of realms fascinate you?
Well, I suppose the Moonstone, which was the Wilkie Collins book, that was another BBC series, and that was great because it was the same story told by lots of different people, and it was a period drama, and I just love period drama. I just do. I mean, I could watch Gosford Park a million times and still not be bored of it. So the combination there was a great story set in a different period, a mystery and a thriller, and I like working on like thrillers and psychological dramas. So, and then the Le Fanu thing that's a feature film that I'm going to be making once I finish this. Again, it's also a psychological thriller, but very different than the original book. The writer of the feature films keeps saying to me, don't read the book, don't read the book. This is much, much better than the book. And the script is great. And I think she's taken the character, and the writer, Elizabeth Gooch, is a great feminist, and she's wonderful. And she's taken the original character of Maud and I think just completely changed her, which is great. I'm really excited about that.
Cool. I just adapted my own book, and I kept saying to myself, don't read the book, don't read the book. Just go full Marie Kondo on it. Thank it for its service. And okay. Yeah, it's fun stuff. Dearbhla, you're as we speak, the reason that you have this wonderful background before you is because you are actually shooting Shining Vale here. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Shining Vale is a comedy horror a genre, a new hybrid of a genre which the writer likes to call, as opposed to a sitcom, a shitcom. That it's the same thing that makes you laugh. It's from the pen of Sharon Horgan, who, as we know, is a wonderful Irish writer. And it's a pilot being made by Warner Brothers for Starz, and it stars Courtney Cox and Greg Kinnear and Mira Sorvino. And it's about a family who move from New York up to upstate into Connecticut. It's an unashamed homage to The Shining, hence Shining Vale. And it's a writer who has hit a writer who's a mother, who's a woman, who has hit a kind of a block in her life that is a combination of a drying up of her creativity, her menopause, and a kind of the kids about to leave home. So Sharon tends to write something for each decade of a woman's life that started with pulling in the 20s, catastrophe in the 30s, divorce in the 40s, and now menopause and Shining Vale in the 50s. And it's, anyhow, they move into this. Her husband has got this great buy of a house. We found this incredible house that we were able to shoot everything in here in South Pasadena, which has only ever been on film once. And the only time it was on film was Hitchcock's last film, Family Plot. And I actually shot the therapy session where on the red sofa that Hitchcock seemingly wrote into the house and said, "I'm at home, darlings, don't touch a thing." And really, this place is remarkable. If Warner Brothers had sense, they would, but it's for sale by this incredibly gorgeous woman who married the man who was born, bred, and died there, and his ghost still runs through the house. And I've come across it a few times, and it really should be moved. Well, it'd be great to film in it all the time, except the laws here in South Pasadena mean you can only film for 6 days in a quarter. But it is such an extraordinary place that they should move it brick by brick to the lot in Warner Brothers, because the textures, the crumbling, the darkness. You know, the thing about drama. Film, cinema, the sense of scale, horror is the ability to stand back and observe characters, give this voyeuristic feel, and then be right up close and personal. So what Pat begins to find as it's really an exploration of mental illness, and is she mad or is she possessed? But what we find out is that the woman who lived in the house still roams it as a ghost and is responsible for her own death and another. It's anyhow, hopefully it will. I won't have ruined the script, and it'll get commissioned, and it'll be a series. Hopefully. And but anyhow, it's been a joy. As my agent convinced me to read it, because I was going, what do I know about horror and what do I know about comedy? I'm not a funny person, though I do like to laugh, and I'm pretty horrific a lot of the time. So, but actually, it was like picking up on what Neasa said earlier. The thing about this business is you don't get prepared for it. You survive it, and you self-teach and you learn. And I kind of really make an effort to choose projects that I can connect with somehow, with the central protagonist, which 9 times out of 10 I've been lucky enough, other than in The Tudors when it was Henry VIII, to connect with the women. But I did connect with Anne Boleyn and all the other wives. But to find something that you can relate to in the story and anchor yourself in and learn. So the horror genre has been, and science fiction are my least favorite genres. But I've spent COVID watching horror, and now getting to the point from watching it like this to go, yeah. I spent midterm with my partner's son and being educated on scary horror that we watched in daylight, so I wouldn't be too afraid. So anyhow, Shining Veil is hopefully a comedy series about to hit your screens.
That sounds full of what Donald Barthelme used to call unhealthy mental excitement.
Yeah,
I look forward to seeing the pilot, and I look forward to seeing the series. So
yes.
Thank you for telling us about that. Neasa, you just or fairly recently finished a feature film, which is Sea Fever.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you mind telling us about that?
Not at all. So Sea Fever, it opened the Discovery strand at Toronto Film Festival in 2019, and it was due for release in March 2020. So the weird thing about the film is it's a grounded sci-fi, and the story is basically a story about it's a kind of eco thriller. So it's set on a boat, and the kind of themes behind the story are no man is an island. You know, we have to kind of take responsibility for each other, and when a contagion hits the boat, the people on the boat have to decide whether they're going to self-isolate or go home and try and get help, but risk spreading this contagion. So that's kind of the central premise of the story. So yeah, the PR company did a really good job. So that was a strange experience, but that's essentially what the story is. And straight out of that, I did a thriller with Netflix called Hit and Run, which is hitting the screens next year. And I'm currently filming in London a new adaptation, or an adaptation of a novel by Naomi Alderman called The Power, which is a feminist speculative fiction, kind of big epic story about what might happen if the world were exactly as it is, except young girls, teenage girls, develop the ability to electrocute people with their fingers.
That too sounds full of unhealthy mental excitement. Having seen the way that your 2019 film now has this sort of large brand extension marketing tie-in that we've all been living through in the past year, I hope the film you're working on now doesn't have similar real world repercussions, but that's just a personal preference. Could be. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes in Gulp, our industry, that have been happening. My favorite formulation of the transition that we all seem to be going through is a quote from Ted Hope, who used to be head and then co-head of Amazon Studios, and is before and after that a very well-known independent producer. And he just said, "The film biz changed in 2020. The studio's theatrical release single title revenue-driven model has been replaced by the global streamers' platform-first, portfolio-based, attention-driven audience acquisition model. I don't even know if I could say that sentence again. But I think it does seem to be a kind of, as opposed to, you know, there are movies and then there's TV. There's a world in which there are stories that are kind of sort of told in 2 or 3 hour chunks. And then there are stories that are kind of sort of told over a longer span. And you see them in different places and experience them in different ways. And as storytellers, as people who craft narrative, as people who make something from nothing, I would love to hear your takes on how that has changed your thinking about the stories you're telling, and in what ways it's created larger opportunities for newer and different kinds of narratives and newer and different kinds of voices.
Okay, who wants to go first?
Definitely you, Lisa.
You're being voluntold.
I'm not sure that I'm actually going to be the most articulate about this in relation to, I mean, I'm making a TV series and then I'm going on to make a feature film, and they're two very different things. And the feature film I'm going to go on to make has got a very low budget, but I'm really excited about making it. And one of the things that really excites me about making a feature film is that, and maybe it's, maybe this is not true, but with television and with a certain amount of television that you make, there are certain requirements when you're telling stories. Whereas with film, I think as a director, I can definitely be more free about how I want to tell the story, and that I'm not always required to, have everything on screen, have a close-up, all of these things that you are more required to have when you're making television drama. Now, I haven't made any television drama for the streamers yet, and of course, the more and more stuff that's been made, the more brave I'm hoping that everybody will become, because I think the broadcasters need to catch up a bit on the streamers about what audiences are capable of processing. And I always love the idea of not feeding the audience everything. And some great stuff that we see, particularly coming from the streamers, where really, you get to engage as an audience member, but you really get to use your mind. You're not told everything. You've got to work things out. And for me, from a viewer, that's exciting television. That's exciting. That's an exciting way to experience this sort of storytelling. And I think when I'm making a feature film, I can do that more. I don't know if that's answered your question in any way.
Well, it wasn't really a question anyway. So, but I do think that you're right, that for a long time, the major studios and the large networks operated in the same manner that William Burroughs once described the economy of the heroin trade, which is, don't improve the product, degrade the buyer. And now I think, due to the success of more interesting, sophisticated narratives and more complex protagonists, we're actually seeing stories that might be stories about people we might know, or people who might even be us. And I think my guess is that now that's started, I don't think they can turn that back, and that's a lovely thing.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts that are prompted by that, or answer a different question entirely?
I guess what I think is, I was brought up in a culture in Ireland that was that there was a very absolute class system about storytelling. There was the movie maker, drama makers, and that one was much more rarefied than the other, and of course, because of the culture of cinema and the great storytellers, that's true at one level. But I think the extraordinary thing about how the absolute explosion of the streamers is that there is more of what people call content. There are more stories, there are bigger audiences, there are more storytellers. And part of the issue growing up is both as women, as Irish people, as we didn't have access to the tools of storytelling, which were owned by studios, or owned by, now anybody can go out and, you know, TikToks can make anything. And sometimes I think, I mean, I remember fighting fights to shoot things on 35mm, and it looked beautiful, but I wasn't able to get enough material to tell the story as brilliantly as I could or should have in the end. And I found myself, you know, making the move to digital, while, yeah, I just think that there's a like tape is cheap. But the good thing about it, one of the things I love about storytelling is collaboration and working with actors. And because there's two things. I worked with the producer, said you can't script emotion unless it starts with the script, it starts at the story. If it's not in there, no matter what lens you put on it or what way you color it or what size the screen is that you're watching, it's never going to touch. And storytelling has to be, I think, about connecting with your audience, the storyteller, and we're from a culture where the Shanachie sat around and looked into people's eyes and felt the warmth of the fire. And that's what I feel the way we tell stories and how we tell stories should be. It should have a burning heart and a need to embrace people, not push people away. And again, in my experience, I've been lucky enough to kind of, start in Irish language storytelling, work with T.G. Cahir, RTE to BBC Channel 4, and with Hulu and MGM, like I've worked in Handmaid's Tale and Fargo. There is really absolutely no pressure to put everything to every word on screen. If anything, they want you to flex your muscles. And the comedy horror I've just done, the kind of the basic rule of thumb with comedy is it works in close-up, shoot it in close-up. And I managed to convince our producers that, how this comedy will work is about the relationship between the characters and the chemistry between them. With the woman's story is because she's a mother and wife and those pressures on her in this house. So the third character has to be the space that she's in and has to be how she interacts with the characters around her. And, I managed, now it might fail and we might be desperate to see the close-up, but we kind of made a little film. I think the culture at the moment wants us to break new ground, and I think, I mean, listen, the control is still in studios' hands, and I'm not naive enough to think we can do anything, but you can certainly do a lot more from within. And I think one of the things also about the explosion of storytelling is I didn't know my stories mattered growing up. I grew up looking at Hollywood films, or other people did that thing.
Yeah.
Now we're empowered to know that, my experience as a young girl growing up in Tubacurry, my experience as a woman is as relevant as any. And to have that, to realize that what's been stopping us has obviously been a system, but also that we've stopped ourselves. And when that's kind of removed and that my voice matters and I have something to say and what I say matters. And I mean that not just politically, but, emotionally and in the point of view of relationships. I found myself, I had to cast a character who was serving a function in a script for the main character, Courtney Cox, where she's had a brief affair. And I had to cast this, he was a handyman. I mean, he really was a function of the script. And normally when I'm looking at castings, I write down, description of the person, also the warm, just little notes I remember about. And so there was this 6 or 7 or 8 different handymen from LA. And I wrote cute. Oh, cuter. Oh, cute. I had nothing to say dramatically. And for a moment, I thought, oh my God, this has been the experience in Hollywood for so long. Men watching casting tapes, looking at pretty women and like who's pretty to fit into. And I felt dirty. I kind of had I won't say Harvey Weinstein, but it was, when a character is only skin deep and doesn't have a function, in terms of what they're thinking. And I think there's so many brilliant stories being told, that and parts for women, 40-something, 50-something women, and it's really exciting to be menopausal and still actually working, have something to say, and people care what you have to say, even though you're going crazy saying it. So I'm kind of like the hybrid of it all. And the more stories being told by more people, the more diverse, the better, because we were brought up in far too singular a culture that, you know, there was only one voice and one thought, and if you stepped outside of that, you got sent off to a school.
Yeah. Well, if the democratization brought on by, you know, digital technology and all else results in stories like the ones you're making, then we've won.
There's two sides
Neasa?
to it, I think. I mean, I feel, you know, Ted Hope is right, obviously, in that we are undergoing a seismic transformation. And the truth is, the ground is shifting under our feet, and it's still shifting, and we don't know what the new landscape is going to be like. And I think there are positives and there are negatives to that. I think, you know, thinking back over the last 4 years, particularly the last 4 years in the US, and you go, well, oh God, you know, we're living through a kind of a political process. What is it that I should be doing? Or, you know, you look at how the rise of radical right across Europe. What is it that I should be doing? And, you know, you put your body on the street and you join whatever protests there are in your town, in your city, in your country. And then I thought about it going, okay, so the other side of this is we make culture. That's actually what we do. You know, audio visual storytelling, it is one of the foundational cultural forms of our era. And the stories that we tell matter, because they are the things, like stories are the vessels for ideas. They're the vessels for empathy. And so therefore the kinds of stories that we tell are really important. And I think one of the things that the streamers have permitted is, in the pursuit of profit, let's be, you know, pretty blunt about it.
Let's be honest about
it. They have realized and acknowledged by looking at the big data that there is a bigger audience out there than just the straight white men who can be served. And if that audience is served, profit can be garnered from that serving. And I think culturally that's valuable. I think that at the same time as that's happening, obviously the ground underneath us is shifting, and the ground in terms of feature film is shifting. And feature film, I think, does perform a different function. And as Lisa was saying, you know, feature film, it still feels to me like the thematic underpinnings in a feature film are easier to they're easier to maintain, because you don't have you know, an enormous, great big long story that you have to tell that has to, you know, generating that much story can be difficult. I think it's not necessarily true. I think you know, I think the thing that I'm working on right now actually has a really strong thematic underpinning that feels kind of filmic in terms of how the narrative is structured. This sort of Tolstoy idea of, we have an argument that we're going to make, and we're going to mount this argument through this kind of global story. And I hope that becomes more common in long form storytelling. And the truth is, I think there are so many variables, and the ground is moving so swiftly under our feet. It's really hard to know where that's going to end up.
Yeah.
But we'll hit a new.
I mean, in a celebration of Irish filmmakers, I hate to quote in Italian, but as Antonio Gramsci once said, the old is dying, the new cannot yet be born. In the interim, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. But some of those morbid symptoms are movies and TVs, and some of those movies and TVs are pretty damn glorious. So I think we're both fortunate to be living in an age where each step could be the step into the abyss, but also, as the work and the lives of the three of you show, it also opens up many, many possibilities that weren't there 10 years ago.
100%. And I think, you know, to Dearbhla's point, there is genuinely vaulting ambition on the part of the people who are ready to finance material, that there is an ambition to make something resonant and truthful and thrilling and emotive, and that feels really genuine.
Yeah. I look at the clock here, and I believe Orla is about to come back and say some words that of thanks and to tie this all together. But are there any things that you want to say that didn't have a chance to say in this discussion before somebody rings the bell and makes us all return to our little caves?
I'm interested in a question that somebody has put up here, and I wonder what Neasa and Lisa think. It's hard to explain. It's from, oh no, that's Emer Noon, who's saying something incredibly nice about how lovely it is to see female directors. But there was a question there. Is it from Jean van Sinderman? Is it critical to be in the US to make it as an actor or director? What are your views on Ireland's future as a place for film production? I don't know. I mean, we touched on it earlier, how while we all started our experience at home, but to move to the next level, you had to go away to come back. And there's something about, I don't know, I find that my greatest asset in, you know, in storytelling is, obviously one isn't conscious of I'm assuming craft and knowledge and that you know you obviously have to survive, but Irishness is a great advantage, and something that I really embrace when in storytelling and in production and in collaboration when I'm away, and that's so ephemeral, and it's so interesting, and also just with the arrival of COVID, and how now we can't touch, we can't hug, and there's a filter between our warmth, between our, you know, not our eyes, but you know, ironically, I made a Handmaid's Tale session at Gilead DC last year, where women were all masked. This, you know, before, is that I'm really interested how COVID will affect how we tell stories. Obviously the stories we tell, but also how we tell, because so much of your work as a director is on the set, is pushing your team, is that, you know, that you are leading from the front, you're, you know, getting performances from your actors, and that's, you know, that's a dance of finding the right note, the right way to articulate something, and empowering, you know, gaining the trust of your actors to do something that, no matter what, none of us can do. What an actor does in front of the camera in terms of their warmth and how it can communicate subtext and feeling is a magic that I don't know. I'm in awe of actors in the same way I'm in awe of writers, of what they write. So I don't know, Lisa, Neasa, if you've any thoughts about working internationally and
I think you're dead right, and I would like to say to the person who posed that question, Jan van, can't see the name there, I think it's a great question, and I think the answer is really positive. I think, you know, 30 years ago, if somebody said, do you have to go to the US to make it as a filmmaker, you'd probably say yes, and I don't think it's true anymore. I don't think it's true anymore. I think technology has transformed. I think the industry is infinitely more global. I think, apropos of what we've just been talking about the tectonic plates in the industry shifting so radically, I think you can be anywhere and be a world-class filmmaker and be visible. And that's really exciting. And I think that's also driving the great multiplicity and variety of storytelling that we're getting. It's as a result of that.
I think that's true. I think for a while it's sort of like, oh, you like chocolate. Well, if you want a life in the chocolate business, you have to move to Hershey, Pennsylvania. And now I think it's clear that Irishness is not just an export product, you know, Guinnesson's, Jameson, and Kevin Barry, you know, that there are actually much more real, much more moving, much more important versions of Irishness and the story of Irish people that don't have to be diluted for the international market. In fact, what makes it specific is its feature, not its bug. And I love the fact that we now live in a world where that is now possible, maybe because people finally understood that there was profit in it. But for whatever reason, I really look forward to the stories that get to be told now out of Ireland by and for people in Ireland.
Yeah, I think that's very exciting. I think all the various arms of the screen industry in Ireland did tremendous work during COVID in keeping us afloat, in bringing us together. I never had such a strong collegial feel of directors together, thanks to Bert Hamilton in the Guild, to Screen Ireland, to Screen Training Ireland. I mean, just the extraordinary amount of keeping us afloat. Also, giving development money for directors to develop ideas before producers come along and before it has to fit into a structure and be financially viable. You know, a great initiative called Voice that the Directors Guild and Screen Ireland working together, and that was about acknowledging a voice, that you have a voice, and that and things start with a voice, and then of course it's an industry, and it takes, if there's one job, I mean the only job to have in the industry, I believe, is to be a director, and the worst job is being a producer. That's just the toughest job. So, and finding that marriage, it's like finding a good man or a good woman in your life. Finding that marriage is one of the
Key
great
to a
challenges.
happy life.
Well, I hope somewhere in there's room for writers. But...
Yeah, well. Absolutely.
You are right. It is that triumvirate, isn't it? I think it's Ted Hope again who says, if the director is the captain of the ship, then the producer is the prow of the ship that's like pushing its way through the ice to try to get to the North Pole.
Yeah. There's two things I want to read from the Q&A box before we go. One is a comment by Grania Healy, which says, what is the collective noun for a group of talented Irish women? A clutch, a coven, a gaggle, whatever it is.
The coven.
I like a coven, yeah.
Wonderful to hear the voices behind the quality films and stories being told by them for us. And I find that very moving. Orla, how are we on the clock? Do you want to sing us out, or?
It feels really cruel to cut off a discussion like this. So maybe I'll abuse my position as host and put a question that Roisin Carney. Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry. What's in it for the guys when telling a female-centered story, which is a really great question. So maybe we'll ask you to have a go at that one, and then we'll wrap things up.
I have an answer for that, which is, what's in it for me to watch a story about African American people? What's in it for me to watch a story about a Korean family? What's in it for me to watch a story about Aboriginals walking across Australia? Everything is in it for me. It's compelling, it's fascinating. That's what cinema and visual storytelling is. I want to walk in somebody else's shoes. Show me somebody else's experience. Show me what's the same and show me what's different. I want to feel their feelings. I want to know what that's like. We're all human. It's like the Roman poet Terence said, I am human. There is nothing of the human that is alien to me. Show me your life. I don't know what your life is like, and I want to know.
I think that's beautiful and moving. I think, movies are empathy machines. And if you think about it, having spent 2 hours seeing the world through somebody else's eyes, you might then realize that your own eyes are not the only way the world can be seen. And if
thrilling.
Yeah.
And the less us and them, the better. One for all and all for one. I've been in the States now for this election, the last election, for January the 6th, for a lot of very, very major, and we've got to stop looking at differences and looking at what connects us, men and women, black and white, young and old, Irish and American. So, it's let's start with togetherness, not apartness.
Amen. Lisa, do you have any?
I mean, my answer to that is that, if I'm going up for a job and somebody says to me, what do you know about being like a 20-year-old guy who crashes his car and, is paralyzed? And I say, nothing. I don't know anything, but what I do know about his feelings. And I know what it's like to be bereft. I know what it's like to be happy. I know what it's like to love. You know what I mean? And that's what it all comes down to. It's just a bunch of feelings of how watching somebody or something makes you feel, and whether you can empathize or not empathize or understand or whatever. But I mean, my feelings are the same as your feelings. If you're a guy, I you know, to lose or to love, or it's all the same. So
Yeah.
I'm not very good at separating the two, as
Well
in men
said.
and women.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us. It's been a really fabulous discussion on a personal level. So great to hear Irish voices, and particularly Irish women talking to each other, which is always a pleasure. And I'd like to thank our panelists at Dearbhla Walsh, Neasa Hardiman and Lisa Mulcahy, and our wonderful moderator, Howard Rodman. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Please stay in touch with the Consulate. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Ireland in LA, and we look forward to hosting further events in the future and to staying in touch with all of you. And thanks again to our fantastic panel for a great discussion this morning.
Happy St. Bridget's Day, everybody. Happy St.
St. Bridget's Day.
Bye. Thanks
Bye.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you.
Bye bye. Best of luck at the
Bye,
show.
guys.
Oh, indeed, happy editing.
Nessa.